right, welcome back to the stage, everybody, for our lunch panel. Now, third-party investment can be a critical element of the commercialization process for your technology. While the SBIR and STTR programs are a great pathway to defining and improving your tech, these programs don't support critical items like marketing and scaling. This is where things such as venture capital funding play a key role. But how do you access this funding? What is important to your pitch? Who do you need to talk to? We are going to address some of these questions in our next panel, moderated by Carlos Murguia, Associate Fund Manager and Investment Committee Observer at the Arrowhead Innovation Fund. Carlos is responsible for overall program operations, including the development and implementation of business support programs and industry ecosystems to help startups maximize growth and success. Carlos recently completed the HBCU VC Fellowship, which is a program that provides fellows with venture capital skills training, mentorship, and the opportunity to build professional relationships with seasoned investors and entrepreneurs. He earned a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering from NMSU. He will be joined by panelists Dr. Beto Pallares, Dorian Rader, and Drew Tulchin. And to the audience, we're trying to leave time for Q&A, so please feel free to send in questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. Carlos, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Garrett, and I'm very happy to be here and very excited to introduce to you my fellow panelists. I would like to begin with Beto Pallares. Hi, Beto.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Dorian, how are you doing today?
Hi, Carlos. Hi, everyone.
And we also have Drew. Hi, Drew.
Hey, good day.
Thank you so much, the three of you, for joining us today. As Garrett mentioned, we're going to be talking about third-party investment for entrepreneurs working on SBIRs and how they approach venture capitalists and how they secure funding. I would like to ask each of you to take 2 minutes to introduce yourself, to talk about the organization that you represent, and to focus on, or to give a couple of bullet points on the portfolio and what areas do you invest. Beto, can we start with you?
Absolutely. I serve as the general partner or the fund manager for the Arrowhead Innovation Fund. And within that, we make investments in the state of New Mexico in early stage seed or pre-seed companies. Our investment ranges between $50,000 and $200,000 per company. Our portfolio is broad with respect to the type of companies that we've engaged with, including gaming companies, gaming platforms, as well as health tech companies and companies that are working in various areas of different diseases like Alzheimer's, or also technologies that spin out of a national lab or a university that then go on to scale beyond just the seed stage. My background is in venture capital for the last 15 years, as well as a professor of entrepreneurship at New Mexico State University. So we spend a lot of time working on what helps an entrepreneurial ecosystem develop. And at the center of that is a thriving entrepreneurial resource with respect to having enough entrepreneurs that are pushing the envelope and developing things who can then be paired up with other partnerships, including capital.
Thank you, Beto. Dorian, can you go next? Can you take 2 minutes to talk about your background, your portfolio, and what is the focus on your activities?
Sure. So my name's Dorian Rader. I'm managing partner of 110 Capital. We recently rebranded, so you might know us as NMA Ventures. We're one of the New Mexico Catalyst funds, and we're an early stage VC that focuses on startups in New Mexico, particularly in the areas of high technology. We prefer companies that are a result of technology transfer, so technologies that come out of our national labs or universities, just like NMSU. Average check size for us is about $400,000 to $600,000. And we're currently raising our second fund, And so our second fund will have a little bit of a broader approach we're going to be investing in the Rocky Mountain region, but we're also looking to focus on founders of color and female entrepreneurs. And so my background, I've been with, I'm the co-founder of 110 Capital. Prior to that, I was vice president of the New Mexico Angels for the better part of a decade. I was also a partner with Village Capital, which is an international accelerator and venture fund, and led a mezzanine fund in the meantime. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining today. Drew, are you with us? Hi.
Hey there.
Can you just take a couple of minutes to talk about your background, your portfolio, your organization, and what is your preference for investment?
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. I appreciate this time and opportunity, and also appreciation to our hosts. And then also a quick land acknowledgement that when we think about wherever we are virtually, particularly in the holiday times, to think about those who have owned the land and whose lands we're on before we arrived here. I'm very pleased and honored to be joining a great group of folks. Everyone on this panel is doing amazing work for New Mexico and for startups in general, and they're wonderful resources, and I highly salute and applaud all of them. And these are organizations that should be followed and enjoyed by the people who are listening on this call. My name is Drew Tulchin. I'm currently the president of the New Mexico Angels. New Mexico Angels is a 20-year-old organization serving all of New Mexicans to help the startup and high growth companies to allow us to really accelerate. We also are lucky to be able to work with a number of partners, such as this organization, as well as many throughout the state. More information is on nmangels.com. Historically, this 20-year-old organization has invested in about 4 to 6 companies a year. On average, it's been $250,000 investment into early stage efforts in a for-profit company. In the last year, we've worked with 12 companies and we've been able to place $4 million. So our averages are moving up because the needs of New Mexico startups are higher than that. And what we want to do is provide training for entrepreneurs to allow them to understand the venture path. We want to provide relationships and connections so that the ecosystem can really flow and remove the barriers to it. And then we want to be able to help companies, once they've been able to close some money, to really put their foot on the gas and get to the next level with relationships through our state, through other types of financing, and other leveraging of marks to get into the marketplace. Personally, my background is as a fractional CFO. So I work as a CFO helping a number of companies build with robots, Electric Playhouse, and then I was the first CFO for Meow Wolf up in Santa Fe and now in Las Vegas and in Denver. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's start the conversation. And I was very pleased to be invited to this panel. I see innovation coming from SBIR, STTR, from scientists, and then I see venture capital as 2 different ecosystems or 2 different worlds merging in the recent years, because both are taking advantage of each other's strengths. So very, very happy and very pleased. And I would like to start the discussion with the attractiveness of SBIR. We know SBIR is a great way to develop a technology, to secure IP, to get some initial capital to de-risk a technology, and even to get some conversations with the government, with potential customers, with some other colleagues or leads in the industry doing the same kind of development. So the question that I have for each of you, and I would like to start with you, Beto. What are your thoughts on the attractiveness of an SBIR? Like, do you find a company more attractive? What advantages do you see when you look at investments?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the SBIR process is very well organized, very well thought out, and in many cases, strategically positioned for the national benefit. So that's a very important component. Furthermore, it works to really engage not just the academic sector, but the research sector writ large, to work on things that are not just of national importance, but really in many ways important to humanity, important in the investment in technology and the like. So that's an important component. The US government through this program does a wonderful job in identifying, after they go through SBIR 1s and 2s and others, in identifying things that that there's a real there with respect to the merits of the technology or the scientific merits of what they're exploring. Okay, so that I think is a really attractive thing. It is the job of, in my opinion, of private capital and other sources of capital to understand that from that perspective and then support it with commercialization capital, which some SBIRs require, or usually at phase 2 and 3, as a way to really take something that has technical or scientific merit and then explore the commercial merit for that. And so for me as an investor, I pay attention to things that are getting SBIR funding. And then I especially pay attention when they start to work through, okay, so how do we productize this? And we start getting into other discussions that then really extend on the promise of making something really useful for society or for national interests writ large. What I found through research, and there are publications that have looked at this, is that SBIRs are great. Venture capital is great. But when you have something that has SBIR funding, as well as private capital, whether it be angel investing or venture capital in particular, the combination of those two things tend to show that the company performs better over time. Performance in terms of longevity, in terms of revenue, and in terms of exit value for investors.
Awesome. I think you hit on a very, very important point, and the goal of this panel is to provide some insights to participants on how to achieve that goal and how to be able to raise venture capital as well as SBIR, STTR. Dorian, I would like to ask you, what are your thoughts? Have you guys invested in an SBIR awardee? Are those companies attractive? What are your insights?
Yeah, so agree with all that Beto said. It really is attractive to VCs, excuse me, when we do see SBIR-backed companies. I think the interesting part is, and we have invested in those companies, and we have companies in our portfolio now who are actually further down the commercialization path and now looking at SBIRs also. So it doesn't have to just be a launching point. But one of the things we also try to focus on is, helping the entrepreneurs understand the focus of an SBIR. So, unfortunately, we see it a lot in New Mexico, and it's because we're such a research-heavy state. We see companies that SBIRs are very attractive, and they're a lot of fun, and it's a nice source of funding. But then they continue to go down the SBIR path, and so instead of going down that commercialization path, and so sometimes it becomes almost a grant factory. And so, we like to, when we're talking to companies that are going after SBIR or in the process of SBIR, just managing those expectations of, that we are expecting to see a commercialization path, and how do their visions and their goals align with that. So we want to make sure that their strategy is not just to continue down the grant funded pathway, but also to get to that commercialization and marketplace eventually.
Great. And you mentioned commercialization path. So I want to hold a thought there, and then I'll get back to you for the next round of questions. Drew, what do you think? What is your insight on companies that have received SBIR and when they talk to you guys for angel investment?
Yeah, I agree with both of my fellow two panelists. In particular, New Mexico Angels is an angel membership organization, right? So angels, individuals are making their own decision. And many times an individual doesn't have the due diligence background that an institution would, or certainly that a government panel would. So a company that goes through an SBIR, particularly phase 1 and then phase 2 and phase 3, is getting a proof of concept or getting a validation from a third party. And so just on the external merits of that, that's a good thing to be able to say, hey, only 15 or 20% of the people, the entities that apply are approved for these. So that's one way of saying to have your company and your effort to stick out. But then in general, also to have that application, and if you can get it, some of the panel reviews, either get it through a Freedom of Information Act or get it later on, you can get kind of a summary review of what the critiques were. And then have that as a due diligence element in your data room, which is the place you might put a bunch of documents for investors to look at things, or to create your own version that you then share around as kind of a white paper or a proof of concept. So those are things that could be helpful in pairing SBIR with the private investment. And so that occurs to me as something that would help both us as New Mexico Angels when we're making decisions, particularly into science first efforts, but then also as companies move themselves forward, how you have more materials, because I think many of us know that certainly in phase one, the SBIR process is a time and labor intensive fashion. So if you're going to put that time into it, let's maximize your ROI or your return on investment for your time of doing that.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Drew. So going back to Dorian's point on the commercialization path, I would like to talk to you guys and get your pick up your brain on, if a company has received SBIR and they are also looking to raise capital, how do they use the funding and what do they use the venture capital for? Do they take the SBIR for technology validation? Do they use the venture capital money for scaling? What are your thoughts there? And I would like to start with Beto. What have you seen in your portfolio companies or in other companies that has been like a best practice for this topic?
So particularly, let's say SBIR phase one, at that point, it's usually a very sharp researcher working on something novel. And what they're looking for is support to create more partnerships, as well as bring in assistance. That assistance usually comes from a collaboration with another institution and maybe someone they publish papers with or the like, that has an equal passion for this, maybe a different set of skill sets, or maybe they worked in industry in some fashion. They might also bring in some doctoral students who could provide a lot of the muscle power on some of the data gathering and things of that nature that could be very instrumental in really showing some aspect of advancement. The other area could be building a prototypes or validation, kind of very early stage validation. On a phase two, they usually have things that they've answered and things that are still kind of emerging questions that they want to resolve with phase two, and also begin to lay the groundwork for how this has commercialization value, right? And that's particularly interesting because it starts to sort of create a trend line where that's usually, not always, but usually when, say, the private sector starts to get interested, maybe there's other conversations taking place, industry partnerships start to get validated, and that becomes kind of a more interesting structure. Personally, I like to talk to people when they're doing, even before they ever apply for an SBR, or when they're considering SBR 1 and maybe going after SBR 2. By the time you get to SBR 3, you have a fairly good sense that something has strong commercialization value. Maybe you have already an established partnership with industry, or maybe you're looking to expand that, or maybe you're creating a different kind of platform for which you need, access to other kinds of resources, labs or materials or things of that nature. So generally speaking, those are kind of the way I see the SBR process walk through. But where I get excited is fairly early, because it's really exciting to work when someone has a high level of confidence in what they're working on, even though there's still a high level of uncertainty.
Right. So I'm gonna repeat the same process. I'm gonna hold thought on early entrepreneurs, and I'm gonna go back to you on early structure for venture capital. But let me ask Dorian. So Dorian, you brought the topic of the difference in commercialization path and how sometimes the SBIR awardees focus a lot on research. If an entrepreneur is getting money from you guys, what do you like to see that money spent on or to be used for?
Yeah, so understanding that SBIR really is a lot of building out that prototype, building that product, that commercialization ready product. Usually when we're involved, it's typically in a phase two. I do like to watch the companies in a phase one, but typically, my investors just prefer to be more involved a little bit later on. And so when we see them, they're usually building that expansion of resources. They're making partnerships in the market, doing collaborative research projects with industry partners. And so we see them spending a lot of money on staff at that time. So actually building out their team and then, building for that next stage of when they do get to the market, what happens. And so we've had a company where they were actually working on optimizing their process for manufacturing this on a large scale. So I think it depends on the product, but usually for us, it's been a little bit of research, but more intense on the team.
Awesome. Thank you. And Drew, the question that I have for you, whatever check size you're writing for an entrepreneur, what percentage of that funding goes to research and what percentage would you prefer of that funding to go to commercialization in the context of an SBIR award?
I think it's a good question, Carlos. We don't have a cut and dry answer because, again, we're angels and not institutions, and also because we often are engaging with companies very early. So the two things that come to my mind, both from your question and the question you asked, Beto, is what are the milestones of the company itself and of the founders at whatever stage there are? If they're very early and they're not quite at the marketplace, the commercialization levels, some of the things that Dorian spoke to, then I think that can be okay, but they should just be very clear about what a milestone is. The images in my mind is a YouTube video that I saw during COVID, very early on in COVID, and maybe this existed earlier, but I could see people wanting to do this during COVID. And it was the dominoes thing where you'd hit something that would hit something else, that would hit something else, right? And go along to kind of end the maze. And the reason why I bring that up is because you can gamify your business plan. And the way that I encourage people to gamify is what's the piece that can be taken so that you do a body of work and you end up with some sort of conclusion or something you can point towards, right? So if it's the SBIR is going to take a whole year before you hear back from them, you've submitted the application, you have a really strong opportunity, you've gotten good feedback, or maybe even they said yes, but you haven't gotten a letter yet, which can take months, and you need the investor money. What are you going to use that for? And how are you then going to prove both to the investor and to your business model, once you've gotten through that, where you are? And so that to me is the more important question, rather than some sort of pie chart of where I'd like it to go, but where's the company, what stage you're at, what do you need to prove at your next milestone, and then to allocate the cash to show that you can get there safely and then have something to show for it.
Yeah, awesome comment. I'll go back to you on once you are working on that presentation to investors, on the structuring, on the strategy for the few months. But let me go back to Beto. Beto, let's go to the early days. And I'm an entrepreneur working on a very exciting technology, and I would like to do both, raise venture capital and then apply for SBIR, STTR. What is the best company structure in terms of LLC versus a corporation, and for venture capital, or the one that is your preference? And then what is the best company structure for the IP? If I am an entrepreneur who has an LLC and is working for an SBIR STTR, filing patents under my name, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I've heard lawyers do this, right? They usually preface it as this is not legal advice, right? So as a non-lawyer, this is definitely not legal advice. But I will say this, I will tell you what I've seen, and then I will caveat with, you don't go to a dentist for brain surgery, right? So at some point, you'll have to have conversations with legal experts that can give you those nuances as they apply specifically to your case. So what I've seen is when an entrepreneur or researcher says, hey, I think I have this really unique opportunity here, both on the research side and possibly on the commercialization side. You might want to pick one. And usually you could pick the LLC structure because it's fairly easy to create and fairly uncomplicated at the start. It could be just that one researcher that's named on that LLC or a couple. You can use that as the entity that either receives the funds or does things or what have you, and is kind of the third-party entity that that's interacting with this SBIR. The moment you bring in a third-party investor, they may invest in an LLC. I've seen that, and we've done that. But when you want to give ownership or sell ownership in a company, typically the way to do that is through a C corporation. It has very different tax implications, very different reporting implications and the like. It's not out of the question that you can form a C corp that then, you know, it's kind of your entity as you're going through the SBR process. But what I've seen is predominantly LLCs, very simple structures and the like. The moment you then have to raise outside capital, and you're going to do it from an institutional investor like a venture capitalist, and that dollar amount is significant, you might consider the C corp, right? And that becomes a different structure. And there's certain requirements with respect to SBR applications and what percentage of the entity you or the collective you as researchers or entrepreneurs own versus a third party like an investor. Okay, so those are things you have to look at on a case-by-case basis. My suggestion would be to have, you know, multiple conversations. You know, go to your institution and say, what has historically happened here? How have people done this? Go to a local angel group, or, you know, in the case of New Mexico, to the New Mexico Angels and say, how have you seen these things being supported in the past? Speak to a couple of institutional investors and see how they've worked with, you know, SBR recipients in the past. It is easier to go from an LLC to a C corp. It is very difficult to go from a C corp to an LLC. Now, in terms of where that IP is owned, it's very easy to own it within the LLC. It is also easy enough to own it within the C corp. What I don't like to see, especially early on, is when you have a web of legal entities, and it's very hard to trace who owns what and where the investor is going to essentially, you know, have a right for investment. So you want to keep it simple to the degree that it makes sense. Now, one more thing. Sometimes you could have a complicated type of entity. Maybe you're doing research in biosciences. It's going to be many years before, you know, you get kind of through clinical and things like that. I have seen situations where those are LLCs and not C corps for quite a long time, and there's probably some tax implication for that. But generally speaking, LLC is simplest. C corp is a little more complex, but doable. Probably start with the LLC first.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you, Beto. Among the same lines, Dorian, what have you guys seen? What has worked for you? Any insight in terms of company structure and IP holdings?
Yeah, so very similar to Beto, we've invested in LLCs. It's a great place to start. You can set it up on the Secretary of State's website today for $50, 15 minutes, it's done. And not that hard to convert to a C Corp later. The only thing investors will not invest in typically is an S Corp, just because of the way it trickles down, especially for losses to investors. So C Corp and LLC, pretty much the safest way to go. We're okay with Delaware. We've done Nevada, but New Mexico is just as good.
Awesome, thank you. And Drew, from the perspective of a solo investor, or when you guys put a special vehicle entity, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so New Mexico Angels, again, we're a membership organization, so it's made up of individuals. Each of those individuals could make a decision, his or her, their self, and write an individual check into a company. So certainly you should be encouraged to pursue relationships. In addition, when we act collectively, we create what's called an SPV, or a special purpose vehicle. Legally, that's an LLC, where everyone will invest together, and that investment entity will write a single check into a company The benefit of that is that then you only have to liaise with one entity or one person instead of having to herd a bunch of cats yourself. That's usually our job. So that's how things operate functionally. In terms of then what the handshake is or who we end up investing into, I have two thoughts. One is I agree with Beto, keep things as simple as possible. We have seen sometimes when innovation groups or people connected to an institution have various legal entities that make sense when engaging with that entity, right? So if you are part of a collection of people, everyone has different IP, you create a separate entity for that purpose. But then when you're working with your customers, meaning your investors or an outside audience, what made sense to you internally suddenly is the opposite. It doesn't make any sense at all. And the more you have to explain, the more barriers you put in the way of someone making an investment decision, you're giving it out for them just to say, oh, never mind. Oh, never mind, I'm out. Even if otherwise they might like you, they might like the team, they might like the innovation, and they might like the SBIR. So don't give people excuses or reasons to do that. The other thing that comes to my mind is just as Beto had the disclaimer, we are definitely not lawyers, and thankfully so, but do talk to lawyers. It's worth paying them for what they're good at. For some reason, we often see companies that have just done weird things. And I don't know whether that's because they're cutting corners and trying to save money, or whether there's some lawyers that give different advice depending on the day of the week. I don't know, but there are a number of law firms that do excellent work in securities. In New Mexico Angels, we have some sponsors that we're very thankful for who are doing tremendous work, and we welcome to advise them, recommend them. So it's okay to pay the money for a good lawyer to get good advice and to do good implementations, to have a really good foundation to make it easy at the next steps for investors, SBIR companies, and partners to engage with.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. Let's move from the company structure to the actual pitch or approaching an investor. I'll go again with you, Beto. What are the red flags that you see when entrepreneurs come to you? What do you like to see? What you don't like to see? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak in generalities. You know, there are 5 things that we look for, generally speaking. One is, does this have the potential to be a solution for a very big market, right? If it's a niche solution, it probably doesn't merit venture capital. There's probably other sources of capital that are more appropriate. But if it's a big market and you have the possibility of being number 1, number 2, maybe number 3 in the market, where, you know, I'll give you an example. Uber, right? Non-technical, but they're number 1 in the market. And then there's a number 2. And can anybody name number 3? Probably not, right? So you have to be able to say, hey, you know, there's a big market out there and we could be number 1 or number 2. And, you know, maybe there's a lot of money that needs to go into this or what have you. Great. Maybe it's a pharma solution. Maybe it's a medical device, those kinds of things. Number 2 is, what is your team all about? And I emphasize team. It is often unrealistic to assume that one individual can handle all aspects that a startup or a business needs with excellence, not because they don't have the capacity, but because you probably don't have the time to be excellent in every single aspect that it takes to run a business. So we like to see people that partner. And that is why SBRs in particular, and the process in particular, welcomes that, because you could create relationships with other institutions or people within your institution, with industry, where you start to learn, you know, sort of like who's in the market, who knows what, how do you partner with them? And now you have a team, right? So we look at team as an important component. Number 3 is what's protectable from what you're doing. Is this something that's easy to copy? Or is this something that has, you know, the potential for filing IP and things of that nature? Number 4 is, what stage is your prototype in? If this is something that you've been working on for long periods of time, but you've never actually articulated it into a, you know, maybe a prototype if one needs to be there, then that could be a red flag. And number 5 is, what is the potential for generating revenue, right? Or is this a solution that maybe has a big market, but there really isn't an established payer for that, right? Or there's one payer for that, and you're not sort of in that know or in that circle to really establish that. Outside of that, some red flags for me would be, this is the 12th SBIR you receive or apply for essentially the same thing, okay? Sort of, perfection is the enemy of good enough. And quite frankly, there's lots of products. Now, if you're talking about a medical device, of course, it needs to be, vetted and whatnot, but you don't necessarily vet it completely in the petri dish of an SBIR phase 1. You vet it through the various stages that you got to take it through. So that's one red flag. The other red flag is potential conflicts of interest where, there's cross ownership in the same vendors that are helping you do stuff. And it just feels like it could be a conflict of interest as we move along in that process. A third one could be where, there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's encouraged that SBIRs be a component of maybe your summer support as a researcher, because it allows you to stay engaged in your field and top of mind. But when the budget for the SBIR is essentially 99%, I don't think SBIRs work that way per se, but you have to understand that it's not just staff time, but it's if there's a prototype to be made, or if there's other things to do, those are important things to include in that. The last thing I'll say is that, correlated to my first statement, that nobody's really 100% fully expert or capable in all areas of running a business. I know that I look for who's the person that's helping you get the right infrastructure, financial reporting back to your program manager and things of that nature. Those aspects are very important, because when you do decide to run a company, those aspects become important as well, over the longevity of that new enterprise. You need to be able to know where your business is at some point in time, and usually some financial skills are necessary. So engaging people early on who have skill sets that are at a stronger stance than yours, to me is a good thing, and not a detriment to the process of the future of that company.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight, Beto. So Dorian, Dale, my colleague Dale, shared with me that on average, SBIR phase 1 funding has a 50% win rate, and venture capital has even a lower rate of investments. Why? What are the points or the red flags that you see in a company that you don't like, or that prevent you from investing in them?
Yeah, so I think when we're looking at the pitches, we're looking for the same 5 things Beto's looking for. One of the things I particularly see, especially in New Mexico, that people are missing is the understanding of the use of funds. So if you're raising $1 million, where does that actually go to? Because a lot of times I hear, well, it's going to grow the company and grow the product. But, as investors, we actually want to see you get down into the details of that and understand that. And so, on top of that, a lot of most SBIRs, especially out of technology transfer, are started by technical founders and CEOs, and that's wonderful. As my panelists can attest, there's very few technical CEOs that lead companies, long term. And so, does this, when we're looking at the team, does this person, as a technical lead, are they going to be the future leader of the company, or do they have a plan to fill those gaps of where they need that expertise? Do they need that business development person, and do they have a plan to get it? And then one of the flags we see is just when people pitch to us, especially for SBIRs, they say they just want to get the matching funding, and they'll kind of take care of the rest. And so we actually want to see, I want to see that strategic plan of what happens in 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and how do we play a role in that? Or are we just here to help you get the SBIR? And so we actually, that's something I think it's important for entrepreneurs to remember, is that as venture capitalists and investors, we are a partner in your company now. We're not just a bank loan. We are a member of your team now. And so how do we work on this going forward together?
Thank you. So I keep hearing team, people. Drew, I would like to pick up your brain on what do you like to see? What is a home run? I know that you mentioned before you sometimes are a fractional CFO with companies. What do you like to see when people come to you in terms of the team? If they have a board of advisors, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So when I was going for my MBA, which is now some time ago in our venture capital class, the venture capitalist who was sharing with us said, what are the 3 most important things that a venture capitalist looks for in making a decision for a company? And we actually were supposed to kind of guess and so forth. And to make a long story shorter, the answer was people. So incredible technology is wonderful, IP and a strong market and all that thing is great, but it's really about the team, particularly in New Mexico. And if people here are listening from beyond, sometimes the team can be small just because there isn't that much money, or you're early on, so you haven't met that people. So do the dating, build the circle around you that you need to really have a full grouping. For those who know Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, one of the advantages of Meow Wolf is that it was a collective of artists who had worked together for many years before they actually had figured out that a business could be made from what they're doing. And so they'd kind of gotten the failures out of the way, so to speak, and they'd built up the team, they'd figured out how to work together, they had different roles, and they'd done that over years. And that was really important. So people, having a full team, and then having defined roles. And then Carlos, you mentioned the board of advisors or advisors. That's also a very strong addition that I highly encourage. And if you don't have advisors, then it's never too late to start. And what we usually suggest with that is start with the advisors who are available to you. If it's the proverbial kitchen cabinet, right? The people you have access to, even if it's the metaphorical uncle or actual uncle, or if you're more of an academic, somebody who's been a mentor for you. If those are the people you have access to, then that's who you should start with. And then you should create the dream team that you want to build towards and work towards adding those folks in. But a board of advisors is good, or an advisory group is good. I don't think a board is actually the right word, because they don't have to have fiduciary responsibility. By board, I just mean a grouping of them. And so a circle of advisors, these are experts in different area. And then you were kind to reference my fractional CFO. If you don't need a full-time person to do the accounting, the legal work, the marketing, these various roles that are typical in a startup, then get the best advisor, then get the best student, or get the best fractional professional who can do this on a consultative basis, or give them equity for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Drew. So we have a couple of minutes left. I would just like to thank you all for your participation. I think we learned about the importance of commercialization and looking for different customers and having a strong team, and looking for applications in addition to the government use of the SBIR. Is there anything, or I would like to ask each of you for your takeaway, any final comments? Beto?
I'll just say that SBIR process is sort of like running marathons. This is a great way to identify researchers and entrepreneurs that are highly passionate, working on things that are high relevance. And for a venture capitalist, this is a great way to find things that move the needle, not just nationally, but also financially for us. So I commend people who continue to pursue that track and to support others that are doing it.
Awesome, thank you. Dorian, what is your takeaway from today?
I'm highly supportive of SBIRs. I'm excited for everyone who's here who is going down the SBIR path or thinking of launching a company. I'm sure it's a scary and daunting journey. One of the great parts about New Mexico is, there's resources here. Arrowhead has wonderful resources for SBIR. The New Mexico Angels have office hours. I have office hours. So I would just encourage everyone, keep your enthusiasm, keep working hard, but reach out to us. We are available for questions and to help you along that journey.
Awesome. Drew, any final words of wisdom for the audience?
Let's see here. I definitely concur that using the resources we have in New Mexico and beyond, NMSU, Arrowhead has done a fantastic job. And so you very much should use the people there who are experts, Dell and Dana and others do this every day. Those of us who have only done it once or haven't done it yet, why should we be experts? So let's rely on the people who have the expertise and listen to them. The second thing that sometimes gets overlooked, particularly people with more of a scientific background from my experience, is to build relationships. So if you have a government agency where your innovation or IP or what have you is going to be housed or be a good partner, build the human relationships. Don't just rely on the process and the bureaucracy and the institutions that every good boy deserves favor. Have human beings who are stakeholders who care about what you and what you're doing and can help you navigate on their side. So you can get both a push and a pull. So I think that's something that's very important, and it won't happen overnight. And then I think the last thing is just to salute our entrepreneurs. It can be a thankless task. It can be a lonely task. And those of you who are considering this or learning about this, whether you're here in New Mexico or elsewhere, we want to support you. Many people have given me a lot of time. And so don't hesitate to ask people for input and expertise and advice. I think as long as you are interesting, as long as you are respectful, many people want to see others succeed, and you'll be surprised what type of doors get open to you and what types of people will say yes to some time and reciprocity of information. So don't hesitate. It's not a weakness to ask for help. It's a strength. Back to you, Carlos.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Drew, Beto, and Dorian. It was a delightful conversation, and we appreciate your support and participation in this panel. And I go back to Garrett. This concludes our participation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Beto, Dorian, and Drew for this great panel. Really appreciate you shining a light on how to approach venture capitalists. Now, everyone watching, we have 15 minutes left of the break. Feel free to enjoy it by heading to the booths and talking to some of the organizations that might help you get there. We will see you at 1:30 for our next panel session. See you then.